Okay. Final question, I guess. Are there any aspects of sport in relation to city branding that we've, in the way that we've been talking about it, you think that are important that we haven't covered? Because when we put together our questions, but when we're talking to other people, sometimes it's obvious that we've missed something. So basically, in our line of questioning around the area of lowercase sport brand building, do you think we've missed anything?
I guess a question that has to be asked is back to my comment about sufficient spaces, green space. Ottawa has somewhat a myth of being a green city because we do have plenty of trees in visible spaces and some nice big parks that in a way almost create a bit of a false impression that everybody has that. There are some quite large sections of the city with insufficient park space, and we're losing parks, tree lots, tree-lined streets, etc., faster than we're replacing them, and so that's something that needs to be reversed if we want our brand to be one of clean, green, active.
That's a good point. So the focus is on the development side rather than the amenities with development.
Priority given to density and jobs created from building and that kind of thing.
And how does that relate when developers have to, from what I understand, is that developers have to put money aside when they're creating something that goes into a city fund to develop recreational facilities. So do you think the ratio is inadequate now?
Yeah, I mean, it may not be purely about money because I recognize that you make a developer pay too much money into the recreational side, then suddenly trying to create density by building houses that you've then tacked $10,000 onto each unit might just undermine the whole exercise. I think it's a combination. Maybe it's not quite enough, but also particularly in the denser central parts of the city, it assumes that you can buy land with that money and create a new park, as opposed to just fix the swings or add a second slide. I've lived in Tokyo and I know what it's like to have an entire neighborhood where the only park is a dirt patch with two slides because too many people are trying to use too little amount of space and it just doesn't work. It's just worn out and yet nobody could afford to knock down a couple of buildings and put a park in instead
because of the real estate
because of the cost of the real estate. And that's what we don't want to reach that point. No. We have to defend it in a few areas. We sort of are. I know Catherine McGinney, she's in Centretown. So she and I both have quite large budgets built up from cash in lieu of parkland money. And people say, well, why are you sitting on all that money? Why aren't you spending it? Because I have to make a strategic decision. Do I put in another swing in a park that already exists, or do I save money to try and create a new park or build a new community center? Because wearing out the existing one we've got just by adding in, another locker or going down that road to create new. The idea behind that cash in lieu of parkland is to create new capacity. It's not to repair what exists. But there's another factor as well, which is the city hasn't put enough money aside to repair, to keep in good repair our existing facilities. So now we end up using our cash in lieu. We changed our policy. We shouldn't have, and I fought against it, to allow us now to spend cash in lieu of parkland money, which is supposed to be spent on increasing capacity to match the increase in population. Now instead we're also allowed to spend it on repairing. Well, what does that mean? The loudest voices are going to be fix the broken water jet, not build a new park. So unfortunately a lot of our money is going to get sucked up into repairing.
Was that a recent thing? Like in the last 3 years?
And in a way, it was one of those cases of backfiring where I was particularly outspoken about the insufficient money to going towards park maintenance, and then suddenly that boomeranged on me and a few others, where with this mayor and some other councillors going, oh, well, we could just change our policy to allow you to spend your expansion money on repair. And I don't want that. And, well, you don't have to. It was sanctimonious lecture I was given. It was like, well, councillor, if you have the backbone, you can refuse to spend it on maintenance and just use it on expansion. Oh, get serious. The moment that the public knows that it can be spent on fixing, I mean, I had a decision at the Glebe Community Association meeting where they passed a motion saying, although we don't want to spend money on this money on replacing the lights in Central Park, and we know it shouldn't be used for this, we hereby authorize spending the money on replacing the lights, because it was like, we can see that for 10 years we've been trying to get the broken lights fixed, and the only way it's going to get fixed is to use money that should be used on getting a new park.
I didn't realize that. That's a big policy switch, isn't it?
Yeah.
And as you say,
very subtle, but
I like that
important.
if you've got strong enough backbone, you can
Nobody
resist it.
has a strong enough backbone.
Not against that. No.
That's why you have a policy to say you're not allowed to do that.
Yeah.
Because that's not what a developer is not supposed to be. Yeah.
No, that's
very
quite
clear
a big,
what that's supposed to be for, which is more people should mean more recreation facilities,
more capacity
not
generally,
more frequently fixed
because it's
ones.
just getting worn out.
Yeah. Be a lineup to get on the swing. Yeah.
Okay, no, that's a really interesting thing, because I hadn't thought about. I was unaware of that, so I could factor that into the framing of the situation as well.
And I don't know, is that a symbol of an indicator of lack of importance, perhaps? Your whole question of
I think it could be
branding?
That's how I would read it.
That enough of council would make a decision to basically, we don't have enough money and we're not going to put enough money in here, so instead we're going to raid money that should be about expanding.
When corporations do that, it's usually because it reflects the underlying thinking, doesn't it?
The whole thing isn't that important.
Yes.
What it says to me is, overall, recreation and small S sport isn't that important. So,
So it doesn't matter how we fudge it, as long as it gets fudged.
Yeah.
And that's why that's really important, because I say I was completely unaware of that. But that helps to frame this whole, like the conversations we've had with some of your colleagues and things. It's like, okay, that puts it into a different light. So when we're doing the analysis and the framing, we can, because if people talk, and then you look at their voting record and they vote against that kind of, or in favour of that kind of thing, then it changes the game a little bit. So it's really interesting. Good. Final question for you. Do you think or are you aware of any other people who could be of interest for us to speak to? And could you introduce this to anybody you think would be interesting to continue this research? Because the whole sampling method is really just snowball sampling. So the people we meet, we're asking them if they can trigger us on to it. Obviously, we've talked to Matt Fleury. We talked to Dan Chenier. We're trying to get to speak to Jody Mittig, but he's blown us away 3 times now, so we're still trying that. We spoke to Sue Highland. We've spoken to Marcy Morris from Ottawa Sport Council. Darryl at Tourism.
Okay, well, to take it right down to the importance of sport, therefore the brand in a very lowercase way, I could certainly introduce you to a couple of people in, I could in sort of smaller sports associations, like everything from the people who maintain the speed skating oval in their volunteer time, who used to have teenagers active, but they've all moved on and they still do it.
Still doing it, yeah.
Quite incredibly, what drives them. Couple of people in, let's say, the Glebe and Old Ottawa East who got very active parks and recreation sort of subcommittees of their community associations.
That would be fantastic. Yeah,
if you could give their sense of the games that they and their councillor